Hello, and welcome back to Physics Corner with your host, Jake. So glad you joined us again. This week in physics, quite a busy week once again. We did a whole bunch of stuff again. We started out the week by taking care and finishing up the logistics of the class. We ended with learning how to set up an e-portfolio so that we can document all that we are doing in the class and so that we can post our comments and the videos like this to the e-portfolio so that our instructor David can find these and track our progress. We also learned how to set up a Twitter account. Twitter is a way to communicate with people. It asks you a question and you can answer that question and communicate back and forth with people you choose to communicate with. That is for the group that is getting a C or better. We learned how to set up a blog, and the blog is for the B group. And then we ended the logistics with learning how to do video and editing video, and then how to post it to YouTube, which I demonstrated with my last Physics Corner. And so that was fun, get all that out of the way, and so that we could begin learning physics. After the logistics, we then started in on the physics with motion. We learned how to use motion sensors. We got to play with those a little bit by moving around. We followed some directions to produce movement, and then those movements produced a graph on the computer. Then we discussed the graphs, and we discussed why certain movements made a positive sloping line and other movements made a negative sloping line. And after we understood that, then we're now able to look at a graph and predict movements that are being made. So that's what we did in between classes, was we worked on a quiz that we learned how to, or we worked on predicting movement. Then the next day in class, we were given a couple graphs and we had to predict the movement made, the motions that were made in that graph, and then we had to try and mimic that. There were a few graphs that we did, and my partner and I, we were able to nail the first graph, no problem. And then the next couple of graphs were a little more difficult. I think our predictions were correct, we just had a hard time nailing the movement. The motion sensors are very touchy, and they pick up a lot of background noise in the movement, so the lines weren't as crisp, but the idea of the movement was there, and so I think we did nail that down. After trying to mimic graphs, we then talked about velocity. We talked about speed and moving and how that affects the graphs, and we learned how to plot a position versus time graph, and then we learned how to move from a position versus time graph to a velocity graph. We learned that we need to stack those graphs so that they can so that we can easily switch from one graph to another, and it helps to do that when they're stacked. So we learned how slope relates to velocity. We learned that velocity is dividing how far you go by how long it took, or the change in distance over the change in time. This is something we pretty much already knew by slope. And then we were just able to relate this to velocity. Once again, David showed us that we already know what we're learning. We're just needing to understand the new terms, or understand how what we know is related to physics and to what we're learning. So one thing I really like about this class is it's focusing on what we already know and then helping us relate that to physics. It's a good approach. It helps to take the intimidation factor out of physics. For me at least, physics is very intimidating. I don't know much about it, and everyone or a lot of people, most of my friends, don't talk highly of it. And so it was very intimidating to me, but this approach is definitely helping me to understand physics and to not be intimidated by it, which is helping me to learn better. After the discussion on velocity, we were then given a velocity graph, and then we had to try and mimic the movement to create the velocity graph. That was a little more difficult to do. We were able to achieve it to a degree, but we didn't hit it exactly right on. Again, I believe it's because the sensors are motion sensors they pick up such little movement, and that we're not able to move as smoothly as needed to mimic the grass. But it was a good exercise nonetheless. After the discussions on motion, and we went into learning a little bit about forces. We split up into groups, and there was David put a big air puck on the floor. It was just there by itself, stationary. And we had to discuss in our group what forces were being put on the puck, or what forces were acting upon that puck as it was just sitting there. We discussed in our group what we thought it was, and we went together as a group and discussed it, and then David corrected us. Most of us had the right idea as far as we were pretty much right on with. We knew that the floor was acting upon the puck. We knew that there was some type of force of the earth acting upon the puck. We called it gravity. But we learned that that's just a name given to force between two objects, and that the earth is actually what's acting upon the puck. The puck was then put into motion. David turned it on, and it's an air puck, so it floats, and then he pushed it, and then we were to say what forces were acting upon it while in motion. And the only difference is that there's now air acting upon the puck. So in essence, that puck would continue, if it were able to, it would continue basically in infinity, from what I could. So that is a little bit of what we did and what we learned through this week in physics. There's still a lot to learn. I definitely need to practice a lot of what I learned. I feel that the what I need to learn section includes practicing and continuing to learn about what had been introduced to us. I also need to learn more about the forces that act on objects and understand that a little better. That was a little rough for me, and it was done very quickly at the end of class. So looking forward to the next class and hoping to learn a little bit more about that. So thank you for joining me in Physics Corner, and I hope to see you next week.